we live our lives in a state of carefully managed anonymity. We order our food with a click, and a stranger arrives at our door, a brief, silent transaction in the night. We trust them, without a second thought, to bring us a meal, and then disappear, back into the anonymity from which they came. But what if they're not just delivering a meal? What if they're delivering a message, a piece of a story that you were never meant to be a part of? I thought I was just ordering a late-night dinner. I didn't realize I was inviting a collector, a man who was hungry for a new story, and my life was the final dish. It was a late Tuesday night, and I was working on a deadline, completely engrossed in my laptop. The hunger pangs hit, and without thinking, I opened up a new food delivery app and ordered from a place I'd never heard of. The Twilight Kitchen, a small, unassuming spot with a weird, vaguely unsettling logo. The delivery time was estimated to be an hour, but the driver arrived in 10 minutes, a feat of impossible speed. He was a tall, thin man with a bizarrely serene expression, a look of profound, unsettling calm that made my skin crawl. He handed me the food, a heavy, brown paper bag, and his eyes, which were a startlingly pale blue, held my gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. "It's a special delivery," he said, his voice a low melodic whisper that was devoid of emotion. "It's for you." He turned and was gone, a silent, ghostly figure disappearing into the night, leaving me with a heavy, brown paper bag and a profound sense of wrongness. I dismissed his strangeness as the eccentricities of a late-night worker. I took the bag to the kitchen, and as I opened it, a new sense of unease washed over me. The food was not what I had ordered. I had ordered a simple pasta dish, but the container held a single, perfectly cooked piece of meat, a dark, rich red color that was glistening under the dim kitchen light. But the shape was wrong. It was a bizarre, unsettling concoction, a spiraled, intricate shape that was not from any animal I had ever seen. The smell was also wrong. It wasn't the smell of a normal meal. It was a strange, sickly sweet scent, like old perfume mixed with something else, something I couldn't place. My appetite was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling curiosity. The buzzing sound from the sound design, a constant, low drone, began to echo in my head. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. I couldn't shake the feeling that the food wasn't a meal, but a message, a carefully curated dish with a sinister purpose. My phone, which was still open to the delivery app, began to receive a series of strange messages. They were from the delivery driver, but they weren't about the food. They were cryptic, disjointed, and utterly terrifying. "It's a gift," one of them read. "The first piece of a story. He's waiting for you." The words were an insidious, low-volume chorus of scorn and judgment, and I was the subject of their constant, disembodied gossip. I tried to block the driver, but the messages kept coming, from a different number, a different app, a different source. They were always a single, cryptic sentence, always a new piece of a terrifying puzzle. I was trapped, a guest in a home that had been built for me, a performance space for a story that was not my own. The buzzing in my mind grew louder, a maddening, relentless beat that was a countdown to a climax I didn't want to be a part of. I began to investigate the food, a morbid curiosity overriding my fear. I turned the container over, and on the bottom, I found a small, intricate carving, a symbol that was eerily familiar. It was a spiral, a collection of interlocking circles that I had seen before in an old, local urban legend about a secret society, a group of people who dealt in human flesh, a horrifying, cannibalistic cult that was a part of the city's dark history. My heart stopped. The food wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was a part of a story, a terrible, violent, and utterly depraved narrative that was now a part of my life. The buzzing from the sound design was deafening now, a mad, frantic beat that was coming from every corner of the room. The food, which had been a still, inert object, began to move. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a faint, rhythmic pulse. That was a heartbeat, a life that was still inside the food, a horrifying, grotesque life that was now a part of my home, a piece of a story that was now a part of me. The climax came in the middle of the night. The buzzing was deafening, a mad, frantic beat that was coming from every corner of the room. I received a final, terrifying text from the delivery app, a message from the driver that simply said, "I'm outside. I'm here for the rest of your story." A slow, deliberate, rhythmic knock came from the front door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was a percussive, final sound. The sound of a door being opened, slowly, deliberately. The sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, coming into the house. I was frozen in terror, hiding in the closet, the food on the kitchen table, a silent, terrifying centerpiece to a story that was now a part of my life. The footsteps stopped outside the closet door, and the light from the hallway poured in, illuminating my terrified face. I managed to escape, screaming, running out of the apartment in a blind panic. I didn't stop until I was miles away, at a police station, a hysterical wreck. The police found nothing. The apartment was empty, the food was gone, and the delivery driver, the man with the pale blue eyes, had disappeared from the app. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The buzzing of a faulty neon sign is a constant reminder of the night I invited a stranger into my life, and the knowledge that the food wasn't a meal, but a message, and the driver, he's still out there, waiting for the next person to become a part of his story. The app, I've learned, still has a Twilight Kitchen on its list, and I wonder, with a cold, lasting dread, who will be the next person to order from it. We are all a series of data points, a collection of photos and posts, and digital trails that we leave behind. We think we have control over our digital lives, that the person we present to the world is the one we want them to see. But sometimes, a complete stranger is the one who truly knows us, who has collected every detail, every snapshot, every fleeting moment of our lives. They can use that knowledge to create a horrifying, alternate reality. A digital doppelganger that is so perfect, so complete, that it can steal your life and leave you with nothing but a lingering sense of terror. I thought I was just ordering a late-night dinner. I didn't realize I was inviting my own ghost to my door. It was a cold, rainy night, and I was curled up on the couch, watching a movie. My phone buzzed with a notification from a food delivery app. I had placed an order for some pizza, and I was just looking for a quick, easy meal. The app showed me the name and profile picture of the person who was delivering my food. His name was Marc, and his picture was me. Not a similar face, not a vague resemblance, but my face. A shockingly perfect, beautiful, high-quality photo of my own face, smiling back at me from the app. My heart stopped. It was a flawless picture, the kind you'd see in a professional headshot, and it was a picture I didn't remember taking. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. It must be a glitch, a bug in the app, a cruel, elaborate joke. I was terrified, but also morbidly curious. I kept staring at the screen, at the ghost of myself, my own face wearing a smile. That felt utterly foreign. The delivery driver arrived a few minutes later, and it was a completely different person. A normal, average man in his late 20s, with brown hair and a polite, neutral expression. He handed me the pizza, and our transaction was quick and uneventful. I was so relieved that I almost forgot to check the food. But as I closed the door, a new sense of unease washed over me. The profile picture was still there, a perfect replica of myself, smiling back at me from the app. The clicking sound from the sound design, a constant, low reminder of a camera shutter, began to echo in my mind. It was a sound that was not in the room, but in my head, a terrifying, incessant clicking that was the soundtrack to my burgeoning paranoia. The haunting began with the notifications. My phone started to receive messages from a new, unknown number. The messages were about my food, my order, my life. They were from the delivery driver, but the name on the profile was my own, and the profile picture was a new photo of me, a candid shot of me from inside my home, taken from a distance, without my knowledge, just moments ago. My heart would pound in my chest every time I heard the notification tone. The messages were a torrent of gaslighting and menace, all of them in a friendly, conversational tone. "I hope you like your pizza," one of them read. "I saw you were watching a movie. I hope you're enjoying it. I saw you get a text from your mom. You should call her back." The messages were a constant, terrifying reminder that I was not alone. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. I locked myself in my apartment, the blinds drawn tight, and I began searching my phone for a sign, any sign, that I was not insane. I went back to the app, to the delivery driver's profile, and I saw a horrifying, new detail. His profile was no longer just a single picture of me. It was a gallery, a collection of photos of me, a curated timeline of a life that was stolen. There were pictures of me walking my dog, a shot of me at a coffee shop, a picture of me in a library, all of them taken from a distance, without my knowledge. The photos were a disturbing collection, a silent, terrifying testament to the fact that my life was no longer my own. The clicking sound from the sound design was deafening now, a maddening, relentless beat that was a countdown to a climax I didn't want to be a part of. The smiling face in the photos, the ghost of myself, was a constant, haunting reminder that my identity was no longer my own. The climax came in the middle of the night. I received a final, terrifying text from the delivery app, a message from the driver that simply said, "You can't hide from me. I'm already you." A slow, deliberate, rhythmic knock came from the front door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was a percussive, final sound. The sound of a door being opened, slowly, deliberately. The sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, coming into the apartment. I was frozen in terror, hiding in the closet, the phone in my hand, the profile picture of myself a silent, terrifying centerpiece to a story that was now a part of my life. The footsteps stopped outside the closet door, and a voice, my own voice, but with a chilling, robotic stillness, whispered my name. "I'm here," it said. I looked through the crack in the closet door, and it was me. Not the driver, but a perfect, terrifying replica of myself. Standing in the middle of my living room, my own face wearing a smile that was a mask of pure malice. I managed to escape, screaming, running out of the apartment in a blind panic. I didn't stop until I was miles away. The police found nothing. The apartment was empty. The food was gone, and the delivery driver's profile had been deleted. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. I can no longer look at my own reflection without a profound sense of fear. The person who stole my life is still out there, and the narrator is left with the terrifying knowledge that her identity is no longer her own, and the life she once had is now a performance for a person who is wearing her face. The clicking of a camera shutter is a constant reminder of the moment my life was stolen, and the knowledge that the person who took it is still out there. Living a life that was mine is a fear that will never leave me. The food delivery wasn't just a delivery, it was a predator. The worst part of being alone in the dead of night isn't the isolation. It's the moment you realize you're not alone at all. It's the moment you realize something is watching you, mimicking you, and learning to talk like you. The delivery has a memory, and it's a memory that's about to become a part of your life. I was a man who believed in convenience, in the simple joy of a late-night meal. But nothing prepared me for the emptiness of that apartment, an emptiness that was filled with a terrifying, silent presence. My name is Liam, and for the past 5 years, my life had been a blur of long late nights, cheap takeout, and faceless apartments. I was in the middle of a particularly grueling stretch, exhausted and just wanting to finish my work. I was in my small, cramped apartment, the only one awake in the entire building. The silence was a heavy, oppressive presence that was closing in on me. I was just happy to have a place to rest my head, a place that felt like a sanctuary. I had no idea that I was about to become the star of a horror story, and the delivery was the director. The horror started with the silence. The apartment was unnaturally silent. No cars, no sound of people, no sound of animals. The silence was a heavy, oppressive presence that was closing in on me. I tried to call for help, but my voice was a small, weak sound that was swallowed by the silence. But then I heard a new sound, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a whispered hello. It was my own voice. I was confused, a little scared, but mostly hopeful. I called out to it, but there was no reply. I was a man who was lost in an apartment, but I was about to become a part of a nightmare that had been waiting for me. I was not a person anymore. I was a memory, a ghost in an apartment, a man who was waiting to be found again. The voice returned, but this time it's different. It's a chorus of voices, a symphony of my own voice, my father's voice, my own laugh, all calling his name. The voices are all around me, a terrifying, malevolent echo of my own life. I've been listened to the entire time, a captive audience in a terrifying, silent play. I turned off my phone, I turned off my flashlight, but the voices are still there. The apartment is still there. I'm in a part of the apartment I don't recognize, and the apartment is a silent, dark monument to my terror. The voices, a chilling, malevolent echo of my own, come through my own mouth, a voice that I can't escape. You're still here. They say you're still alone. I am a professional skeptic, a man who believes in facts, not folklore. But the voices, the apartment, the silence, they were all facts that were impossible to ignore. I was about to run out of the apartment when I saw something on the wall ahead. A small, almost invisible crack in the old plaster. I stopped and got down on my hands and knees, my heart pounding against my ribs, and I pried it open with a knife. I found a small, dark space. The space is filled with old, dusty belongings, a small bed, a single, old-fashioned telephone. The room is a perfect replica of my own, a replica that has been waiting for me. The horror escalated one night when I was huddled in my room, my heart pounding against my ribs. I heard a faint, low click of the front door latch. It's a sound that I had heard before, but now it's a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The man from the closet is in the room. He hides in the bathroom, his heart pounding against his ribs, and he listens. He hears the man's footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. He hears a new sound, a faint, wheezing voice, a whisper so thin and dry it sounds like it's scraping against his ear. "I know you're in there," the voice says. "I know everything about you. I know you like to hide in closets when you're scared." The voice is not the man's. It's my own voice, a chilling, malevolent echo of my own. I'm a captive audience in a terrifying, silent play. I'm a character in a horror story, and the man from the apartment is the director. I ran. I sprinted out of the apartment, but I'm not free. The horror isn't just a man. It's a memory, a ghost in an apartment, a man who is waiting to be found. Again, the horror is in the realization that I'm not a person anymore. I'm a memory, a ghost in an apartment, a man who is waiting to be found again. I am no longer a student. I am a refugee of my own life, a man who knows that the apartment is a lie, and the man from the apartment is a predator, a man who is always in touch. The voices, a chilling, malevolent echo of my own, or a ghost in my own head, a sound that reminds me that the darkness is never truly gone. I am the new custodian of the apartment's tragedy, a man who knows that some memories aren't meant to be forgotten, and some sounds are meant to be heard forever. We enter abandoned places for the thrill, for the quiet beauty of decay, for the stories left behind. We tell ourselves we are explorers, but we don't realize that some places aren't just empty, they are sealed. They are prisons, and the things that were kept inside are just waiting for a new visitor to let them out. My friend Marc and I were veteran urban explorers, but when we broke into the old research facility, we learned, with a profound and lasting terror, that some places aren't just forgotten. They are contained, and the thing that was growing inside is still there, and it's communicating with them. The facility was a local legend, a massive concrete structure that had been abandoned for decades. It was a local legend, a place with a dark history of bizarre scientific experiments and a series of unexplained disappearances. We broke into a small, broken window on a cold, rainy night, armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility. The moment we stepped inside, a profound coldness hit me, a chill that had nothing to do with the lack of heat. The air was thick, with the scent of ozone and decay, and the only sound was a faint, distorted human voice, a low, garbled word that was almost a ghost in my mind. The place was a desolate, cavernous space, with long, empty hallways and hundreds of identical, sterile rooms, all of them filled with the ghosts of forgotten lives. We walked through the endless corridors, our flashlights dancing across the peeling paint and the shattered glass, and I felt a profound sense of unease, a chilling certainty that we were not alone. The first few hours were uneventful, a quiet, dusty grind of exploring the desolate halls and the empty rooms. But then we found it, a single room, unlike the others. It was pristine, the walls were a sterile white, and the light from our flashlights revealed a beautiful but deeply unsettling sight. The room was a laboratory, and it was filled with old, rusted equipment and a strange, pulsating, organic growth on the walls. The growth was a bizarre, intricate pattern of veins and sinew, and it seemed to be breathing, a slow, deliberate rhythm that was the heartbeat of the building. The air in the room was thick with a new smell, a sickly sweet scent of decay and something else, something I couldn't place. The place was a desolate, cavernous space with long, empty hallways and hundreds of identical, sterile rooms, all of them filled with the ghosts of forgotten lives. We walked through the endless corridors, our flashlights dancing across the peeling paint and the shattered glass, and I felt a profound sense of unease, a chilling certainty that we were not alone. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The distorted voice, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the growth itself. The voice was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to hear a faint, rhythmic tapping, a sound that seemed to be coming from the growth itself, a low rhythmic beat that was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening melody that was a soundtrack to my descent into terror. Marc, my friend, began to have a similar experience. He would tell me about a strange feeling of being watched, a profound sense of unease that he couldn't shake. We found a series of old, cryptic, scientific notes and a journal from a scientist who worked at the facility. The journal entries described a horrifying experiment, a project to grow a new form of life, a new form of communication, a new form of consciousness. The project was called the Conduit, and the journal entries described a descent into madness caused by the growth. a descent into a world where the lines between life and death, between consciousness and matter, had been blurred. The narrator's sanity begins to unravel. The distorted voice is now a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The growth on the walls seems to be spreading, pulsating with a malevolent energy, and the narrator realizes the facility wasn't abandoned. It was sealed. The climax came in the middle of the night. We were in the lab, and the growth was all around us, its sinewy veins and pulsating flesh twisting into a terrifying mask of rage. The distorted voice, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a deafening, frantic shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 tiny, desperate voices. The growth began to move, its sinewy veins and pulsating flesh twisting into a terrifying mask of rage. The distorted voice is a deafening shriek, and the narrator realizes the growth isn't just a life. It is a collective of 100 scientists, 1,000 voices, all trapped in a single, horrific body. And it's here to fulfill a promise that was broken a century ago, a promise to be free, a promise of a new life, a new beginning, a new home. We ran. We didn't stop until we were out of the building, out in the cold, rainy night. We never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The facility is still there, a massive brick structure that is a silent monument to a living evil, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the growth is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the growth's haunting, a new person to get trapped with the spirits that are not in the walls, but in the porcelain. They say, an abandoned building is a dead place, a hollow shell where time has simply stopped. But what if it isn't dead? What if it's just sleeping, holding on to the last vestiges of the lives that inhabited it? What if the echoes of the past aren't just memories, but living, breathing ghosts that are waiting for a new visitor to walk through their halls? I've always been an urban explorer, a person who finds a strange comfort in the desolate beauty of forgotten places. But when my friend and I broke into the old asylum, I learned, with a profound and lasting terror, that some places don't just hold memories, they hold souls. The asylum was a local legend, a massive brick structure that had been abandoned for decades. My friend, Marc, and I, armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility, broke into a small, broken window on a cold, rainy night. The moment we stepped inside, a profound coldness hit me, a chill that had nothing to do with the lack of heat. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the only sound was the low, continuous drip of water, a rhythmic beat that was the heartbeat of the building. The place was a desolate, cavernous space, with long, empty hallways and hundreds of identical, cell-like rooms, all of them filled with the ghosts of forgotten lives. We walked through the endless corridors, our flashlights dancing across the peeling paint and the shattered glass, and I felt a profound sense of unease, a chilling certainty that we were not alone. The first few hours were uneventful, a quiet, dusty grind of exploring the desolate halls and the empty rooms. But then we found it. A single room, unlike the others. It was pristine. The walls were a gentle, faded pink, and the light from our flashlights revealed a beautiful, but deeply unsettling sight. The room was a playroom, and it was filled with old, handmade dolls, all of them with a hauntingly lifelike expression. The dolls were sitting in a circle, their tiny porcelain hands clasped in a silent, prayer-like gesture. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces painted with a delicate, fragile smile. They were beautiful, but the silence of the room, the unnerving stillness, was a profound, suffocating terror. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The doll's eyes, which had once been a clear, lifeless blue, seemed to follow us from room to room. The drip of water from the sound design seemed to be coming from the dolls themselves, a low rhythmic beat. That was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening melody that was a soundtrack to my descent into terror. I started to hear the faint sound of a music box playing, a beautiful but off-key lullaby that was so soft it was almost a ghost in my mind. I tried to ignore it, to drown it out with music, but the sound was not in the room. It was in my head, a constant, maddening melody that was a soundtrack to my descent into terror. The dolls began to move. We would leave the room for a few minutes, and when we returned, a doll's head would be turned, its tiny, porcelain hands in a new position, a small, subtle change that I was sure I had not made. My fear turned into a profound, suffocating sense of claustrophobia. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the dolls were no longer just a collection of toys. They were a collective, a living, breathing, terrifying chorus of 100 silent voices. The climax came in the middle of the night. We were in the playroom, and the dolls were all looking at us, their wide, glass eyes filled with a profound, unblinking malice. The drip of water, which had been a low rhythmic beat, was now a deafening, frantic shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 tiny, desperate voices. The music box sound, which had been a gentle lullaby, was now a manic, frantic shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 tiny, desperate voices. The dolls began to move, their porcelain faces twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Their tiny, porcelain hands began to move, their fingers twitching with a malevolent energy. They began to stand, their joints creaking with a sickening, grinding sound, a slow, deliberate walk toward us. They were not just toys. They were a vessel, a prison for a collective of vengeful, malevolent spirits, and they were here to fulfill a promise that was broken a century ago, a promise to the asylum's forgotten patience, a promise of a new life, a new beginning, a new home. We ran. We didn't stop until we were out of the building, out in the cold, rainy night. We never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The drip of water, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer look at a doll without a profound sense of fear. The asylum is still there, a massive brick structure that is a silent monument to a living evil, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the dolls are still there, waiting for the next visitor, a new person to become a part of the dolls, haunting, a new person to get trapped with the spirits that are not in the walls, but in the porcelain. Some abandoned places aren't just empty, they are waiting. They are waiting for a new person to fill their silence, to become a part of a story that is still being written, a story that has no beginning and no end. The price of that companionship is not money, it's your sanity. I am a writer, a person who finds a strange comfort in the solitude of a new place, a place with a story to tell. But when I rented the old mansion to find inspiration, I learned, with a profound and lasting terror, that the story was not mine to write. It was the house's, and I was just the pen. The mansion was a local legend, a beautiful, sprawling Gothic structure that had been abandoned for decades. I rented it from a strange old man who lived in a small cottage on the property. His name was Elias, and his eyes held a profound, knowing sadness. He gave me the keys with a strange, nervous energy. "The house is old," he said, his voice a reedy whisper. "It has its own rhythm. You just have to listen." I dismissed his words as the eccentricities of an old man, and I stepped inside, eager to begin my new life. The house was beautiful, but the silence was oppressive, a heavy, suffocating stillness that was broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something I couldn't place. The house wasn't just a place to live. It was a character, a living, breathing, terrifying entity that was waiting for a new person to fill its silence. The first few days were peaceful. I wrote, I read, I explored the long, empty hallways and the cavernous rooms. But then, the house's influence began to seep into my life, a slow, insidious poison that was slowly twisting my reality. The books on the shelves, which I had carefully arranged in a precise order, would be rearranged. The pictures on the walls, which I had carefully centered, would be tilted at a strange, unsettling angle. I dismissed it as my own carelessness, a symptom of my distracted mind. But the ethereal hum from the sound design, a constant, low drone, that seemed to be coming from the house itself, began to echo in my mind. It was a sound that was not in the room, but in my head, a terrifying, incessant hum that was the soundtrack to my descent into terror. My writing, which had once been a creative outlet, began to take on a life of its own. The characters in my story, a family that had lived in the mansion a century ago, began to feel real. Their voices a chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. I started to see things, fleeting glimpses of a past that was not my own. I saw a reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water, a ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The ethereal hum, which had been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, deafening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The house's walls seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, a rhythmic beat that was the heartbeat of the house itself. My sanity began to unravel. I was not just a writer in a new place. I was a medium, a conduit for the house's narrative, a narrator for a story that was not mine to write. The house was not haunted by ghosts. It was a living, breathing thing that was a part of the house's very structure. A single, powerful, and lonely entity that wanted a new person to be a part of its life. The climax came in the dead of the night. I was in my study, the house's energy, a suffocating blanket around me. The ethereal hum reached a deafening shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a story of a family that was destroyed by the house's insidious influence. The house began to move, its walls twisting and turning, its furniture flying through the air. The ethereal hum is a deafening shriek, and the narrator realizes the house is not a place of ghosts. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on them. The house's walls are twisting and turning, and the narrator is no longer in a room. They are in a swirling, kaleidoscopic void of pure, unadulterated terror. The house is a living, breathing, sentient thing, and it is here to consume them, to make them a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. I managed to escape, screaming, running, out of the house in a blind panic. I didn't stop until I was miles away, at a police station, a hysterical wreck. The police found nothing. The house was empty. The furniture was all in its place, and the caretaker, Elias, had disappeared. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The ethereal hum, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I could no longer be in an enclosed space without a profound sense of fear. The house is still there, a massive brick structure that is a silent monument to a living evil, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the house is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the house's narrative, a new person to get trapped with the spirits that are not in the walls, but in the porcelain. The woods are a place of profound beauty, a sanctuary of ancient trees and quiet solitude. But they are also a place of profound, primordial terror, a place where a person's life is a small, fragile thing, and the things that live there are ancient, terrifying, and hungry. We, as campers, are drawn to the quiet of the wild, but we don't realize that some places aren't just empty. They are waiting. They are waiting for a new visitor to walk through their trails, to disturb the silence, and to become a part of a story that never truly ended. I've been on dozens of camping trips, but nothing prepared me for the echoing silence of Blackwood Forest. My friend, Jake, and I, both experienced campers, were there for a weekend trip. We had hiked for hours, deep into a remote, secluded part of the woods that was known for its quiet solitude and its ancient, towering trees. We set up our camp, a small two-person tent with a fire pit, and we settled in for a night of quiet solitude. But the silence was oppressive. It was a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a heavy, physical weight. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and the only sound was the low, rhythmic tapping of a stick on a tree, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the woods. We dismissed it as a woodpecker or a fallen branch, but the tapping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was a slow, methodical beat, and it seemed to be getting closer with every passing hour. My fear turned into a profound, suffocating sense of claustrophobia. The woods felt like they were closing in, and the tapping was no longer just a sound. It was a collective, a living, breathing, terrifying chorus of 100 silent voices. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The tapping, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. The tapping was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to hear a new sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to be coming from the woods. It was a sound that was not of any animal I had ever heard, a sound that spoke of a profound, ancient terror. Jake, my friend, heard it too. We looked at each other, our faces pale with fear, and we both tried to rationalize it, to tell ourselves it was just a coyote or a bear. But the growl was too distinct, too personal. It was a torrent of despair and anguish, a chorus of lost, forgotten souls that was a testament to the suffering that had been locked away within the wood's walls. My camera, which had been a tool for capturing a moment in time, was now a useless, heavy object, a silent witness to a story that was not meant to be told. The final hour was a terrifying descent into madness. The tapping and the growl, which had been a faint, distant sound, were now a constant, deafening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The wood's walls seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, a rhythmic beat that was the heartbeat of the woods itself. The shadows in the trees seemed to move on their own, to writhe, and stretch into grotesque, human-like shapes. I felt a cold, physical touch on my arm, and I saw a fleeting reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water. A ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The tapping and the growl were now a deafening, frantic shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 tiny, desperate voices. The wood's walls began to move, its trees twisting and turning, its shadows flying through the air. The tapping and the growl are a deafening shriek, and the narrator realizes the woods are not a place of animals. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on them. The climax came in the dead of the night. The tapping and the growl, which had been a faint, distant sound, were now a constant, deafening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The shadows from the woods began to coalesce into a single, massive, amorphous shape, a living, breathing entity of pure despair. The tapping and the growl were a deafening shriek, and I realized the woods are not a place of animals. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on them. The creature emerges from the woods, a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, spindly limbs. Its face is a terrifying collection of clicking mandibles, and its eyes are a burning, malevolent red. The creature begins to move toward us, its movements a terrifying, silent, and fluid dance. We ran. We didn't stop until we were out of the woods, out in the cold, rainy night. We never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The sound of a simple tapping, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer be in the woods at night, and the sound of a simple tapping is enough to send a shiver of cold dread down my spine. The woods are still there, a massive brick structure that is a silent monument to a living evil, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the despair is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the despair. We go to nature to escape, to shed the confines of our modern lives, and find a quiet solitude. But what if nature has its own rules? What if the woods hold secrets that the human mind was never meant to comprehend? What if a secluded lake isn't just a body of water, but a place where time itself is unstable? A place where a single, isolated moment can become an eternity? I thought I was just on a solo camping trip, seeking a few days of peace. I didn't realize I was walking into a place with a story that was still being written, and I was about to become a permanent part of its chilling narrative. The lake was called Whisper Lake by the locals, a remote, secluded body of water tucked away in a dense forest. I had found it on an obscure hiking forum, lauded for its untouched beauty and profound quiet. On my way there, I stopped at a small, rusty gas station, the only sign of civilization for miles. The old man behind the counter, his face etched with a lifetime of sun and hard work, gave me a strange look when I mentioned my destination. "That's a quiet place," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "Some folks say it's a ghost lake. They say people go there and come back different, like they've seen too much of the past." I dismissed it as local folklore, the ramblings of an old man in a lonely place. The lake was beautiful, but the silence was oppressive, a heavy, suffocating stillness that felt less like peace and more like a profound, watchful waiting. I set up my camp on a small clearing on the shore, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The first few hours were peaceful, but as dusk settled in, the low, continuous hum began. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a low rhythmic drone that was the sound of 1,000 crickets. But it was a single, unnatural tone that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the woods. I dismissed it as a natural sound, a chorus of insects, but the hum was too deliberate, too intentional. It was a constant, maddening melody that was a soundtrack to my burgeoning paranoia. I started to notice other things, subtle, temporal shifts. That made my heart pound in my chest. I would be looking at the lake, and for a fleeting moment, I would see not my own reflection, but the reflection of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face contorted in a look of profound, heart-wrenching sadness. The image would vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving me with a chilling certainty that I was not alone. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The hum from the lake, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. The hum was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to have memories that weren't my own. Snippets of conversations from decades ago, a deep, aching sadness that felt like it belonged to someone else. I discovered a hidden, old, forgotten campsite, a place with a rusted fire pit, and a collection of old handwritten notes, and a journal from a previous camper. The journal entries described a similar experience, a descent into madness caused by the hum and the temporal shifts. The last entry was a single, terrifying sentence. "I think I've been here before." My fear turned into a profound sense of isolation. I was trapped at the lake, with a collective, malevolent entity that was not just a ghost. It was a living, breathing thing that was a part of the lake's very structure. The final hour was a terrifying descent into madness. The hum was a constant, deafening chorus, 1,000 voices all speaking at once, a torrent of despair and anguish that was drowning out my own thoughts. The shadows in the trees seemed to move on their own, to writhe and stretch into grotesque, human-like shapes. I felt a cold, physical touch on my arm, and I saw a fleeting reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water, a ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The hum was a deafening shriek, and I realized the lake is not a place of beauty. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The climax came in the dead of the night. I was standing on the shore, my heart pounding in my chest, and the temporal shifts became a full-blown event. The lake dissolved, and I found myself in the same space, but in a different era, with different people and different clothes. I was not an observer, I was a participant. The people in the room, a group of campers from a century ago, looked at me with a mixture of terror and familiarity, as if I were the ghost, and I had become a permanent, living part of the lake's haunting. The local gas station owner's words from the beginning, about the lake's history, came back in a new, horrifying light. The lake wasn't just a place where people disappeared. It was a place where they became a part of the past, a living, breathing ghost in a story that would never end. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, out in the cold, rainy night. I never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The hum of 1,000 crickets, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer be in an enclosed space without a profound sense of fear. The lake is still there, a massive stone structure that is a silent monument to a living evil. And I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the despair is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the despair. We go to the woods to escape the chaos of our lives, to find a quiet solitude that the city can no longer provide. But what if the woods have a way of gaslighting a person? What if the trees, the rocks, the very ground, are all a part of a collective, malevolent entity that is waiting for a new person to fall into its trap? What if a forest isn't just a collection of trees, but a living, breathing thing that has a story to tell? A story that it wants to tell you, a story that you will never be able to forget. I thought I was just on a solo camping trip, seeking a few days of peace. I didn't realize I was walking into a story that was still being written, and I was about to become a permanent part of its chilling narrative. I had always loved the quiet solitude of the woods. This time, I had chosen a remote, secluded part of the forest, a place with a small, pristine stream and a large, inviting clearing for a campsite. The air was crisp, the scent of pine was intoxicating, and the only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. The forest was beautiful, but the silence was oppressive, a heavy, suffocating stillness that felt less like peace and more like a profound, watchful waiting. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing, and I felt a profound sense of unease, a chilling certainty that I was not alone. I set up my camp, a small, one-person tent with a fire pit, and I settled in for a night of quiet solitude. But as dusk settled in, a new sound began, a low rhythmic cracking of twigs underfoot, a sound that seemed to be coming from the woods just outside the clearing. It wasn't the sound of a deer or a coyote. It was the sound of a child, a small, subtle sound that was a ghost in my mind. The rhythmic cracking was joined by a faint, childlike giggle, a low, ethereal sound that seemed to be coming from the woods. I dismissed it as a hallucination, a trick of the mind, but the sound was too distinct, too personal. It was a torrent of despair and anguish, a chorus of lost, forgotten souls that was a testament to the suffering that had been locked away within the wood's walls. My sanity began to unravel, my paranoia built to a fever pitch. The rhythmic cracking of twigs, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. The cracking was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to see things that shouldn't be there, fleeting glimpses of a child's toy, a small red ball, a tiny abandoned shoe, all of them in the woods just outside the clearing, a silent, terrifying testament to the fact that I was not alone. The child's giggle was a constant, deafening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The wood's walls seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, a rhythmic beat that was the heartbeat of the woods itself. The shadows in the trees seemed to move on their own, to writhe and stretch into grotesque, human-like shapes. I felt a cold physical touch on my arm, and I saw a fleeting reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water, a ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The woods were not a place of beauty, it was a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The final hour was a terrifying descent into madness. The rhythmic cracking of twigs underfoot became a deafening, rhythmic beat. The shadows in the trees began to coalesce into a single, massive, amorphous shape, a living, breathing entity of pure despair. The child's giggle was a deafening shriek, and I realized the woods are not a place of animals. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The creature emerges from the woods, a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, spindly limbs. Its face is a terrifying collection of clicking mandibles, and its eyes are a burning, malevolent red. The creature begins to move toward us, its movements a terrifying, silent, and fluid dance. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, out in the cold, rainy night. I never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The rhythmic cracking of twigs, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer be in the woods at night, and the sound of a simple cracking is enough to send a shiver of cold dread down my spine. The woods are still there, a massive, stone structure that is a silent monument to a living evil, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the despair is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the despair. The dead of night has a different feel to it, a different kind of quiet. It's not the peaceful silence of an empty house. It's a listening silence, a profound stillness that seems to be waiting for something to break it. I learned this a few years ago when I worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store in a small rural town in Central Oregon. The store was a beacon of light in a sea of darkness, a lonely outpost surrounded by miles of dense pine forest. My job was simple: stock shelves, clean up, and serve the handful of travelers who would pass through in the early hours. I was entirely alone, save for the hum of the refrigerated drinks and the soft, white glare of the fluorescent lights. The seed of wrongness was so subtle at first, I dismissed it. It was a faint, intermittent flicker on the security cameras, a quick, barely perceptible flash of movement on one of the monitors, a figure standing just outside the front door, then gone. I'd look up, but the large glass windows showed only my own reflection and the vast blackness of the parking lot. I told myself it was just a glitch in the old system, a trick of the light, but my gut told me otherwise. The feeling of being watched was a cold, constant presence. The strange occurrences began to escalate. The figure started appearing on different camera feeds, always just out of view of the windows I could look out of. It would be at the side of the building, then at the back door, then back to the front, its movements too slow and deliberate to be a person. It was a vague, human-like silhouette against the desert rocks, but it moved with an unnatural gait, a loping, shuffling motion that was all wrong. It stood there, motionless, for over an hour, its head tilted slightly, as if it was listening. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague paranoia, it was a certainty. It was an active, focused surveillance. My camera monitors began to malfunction, not with a glitch, but with a series of deliberately vandalized clips. The footage would cut out, just as a shadowy figure would enter the frame. One morning, I found a series of oddly shaped impressions in the soft earth near my car. They weren't human footprints, not in any recognizable sense. They were more like long, narrow gouges, as if something with very long fingers had dragged itself along the ground. My fear was no longer a quiet, internal dread. It was a loud, frantic drum against my ribs. The strange sounds returned, but they were different now. Not the familiar animal calls, but a low, guttural chittering that seemed to come from all around me at once. A sound that was somehow both high-pitched and deep, like a dry leaf being scraped against stone. It would start just as the sun went down, and it would continue intermittently throughout the night, getting closer and closer. The figure on the cameras started to exhibit increasingly bizarre behavior. It mimicked my movements inside the store. I'd reach for a can of soup, and on the security camera footage, the figure would mirror the gesture, its long, spindly arm reaching out into the empty space. My paranoia was no longer just a fear of the unknown. It was a fear of something that knew my every move. The climax of the narrative arrived on a night of a full moon, the kind that illuminated the desert in a stark, unearthly light. I was huddled in the back room, clutching a flashlight, trying to ignore the now constant chittering sound that seemed to be right outside the door. And then, there was a new sound, a loud wet slap against the side of the truck. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Another slap, and then another, a series of them, like something was climbing onto the roof. The chittering was coming from right above me, a sound of anticipation. And then, I heard the sound of the back door being slowly, methodically, scraped. I scrambled into the passenger seat and peered out the window, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. And I saw it. It was clinging to the roof of my truck, a gaunt, impossibly thin figure with limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was the color of wet bark, and its head was little more than a dark, eyeless skull. It was looking down at me, or rather, it was orienting itself towards me, its head tilted in that familiar, unnatural way. The chittering was coming from its throat, a sound of anticipation. Then, it raised one of its long, spindly arms and began to tap, gently, on the windshield. A single long fingernail scraped against the glass, a sound that was deafening in the silence. It was looking at me, and with its other hand, it slowly began to reach towards the truck's back window, its long, tapered fingers curling into a grotesque hook. I made it out. I don't know how. I threw the truck into gear and slammed on the gas, not looking back, the chittering sound fading into the roar of the engine. I drove for hours, until the sun came up, until the desert was once again a place of light and sand and quiet. I never went back. I never filed a report. I quit my job immediately and never set foot in the desert again. But every now and then, when the wind blows just right and the trees outside my window scrape against the glass, I can still hear a low, wet, chittering sound, and I am left with the terrifying knowledge that some stories aren't just stories. They're a part of the world, and they're waiting for you to walk right into them. There's a silence in a high-tech house at 3 a.m. that isn't empty. It's full of a listening presence. It's the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, not from a chill, but from the feeling that you're being watched. I learned this a few years ago when I was house-sitting for a wealthy, eccentric family in a modern, smart home-enabled house. My name is Sarah, and I'd been a babysitter for them before, but this was my first time staying overnight. The house was a museum of sleek, minimalist design and cutting-edge technology. Everything was controlled by a central AI system named Iris. IRIS managed the lights, the temperature, the security, everything. It had a calm, pre-recorded male voice that would announce every command. I felt safe and secure, surrounded by the comforting illusion of technology. The parents were away for the weekend, and I was entirely alone. The house should have felt like a sanctuary. The seed of wrongness was so subtle at first, I dismissed it. It was the sound of the AI system's voice. It wasn't the calm, pre-recorded male voice I was used to. It was a faint, sibilant whisper, a sound that was too close and too personal. It came from a speaker in the kitchen, just as I was getting a glass of water. It was just a sound, not words, a low, continuous murmur that was barely audible. I told myself it was just a glitch in the old system, a trick of the wiring, but my gut told me otherwise. The feeling of being watched was a cold, constant presence. The strange occurrences began to escalate. The AI system began to malfunction in unsettling ways. Lights turned on and off in empty rooms. Doors locked and unlocked on their own. I would hear the familiar click of a door handle and the soft thump of a door closing, but when I'd look, the door would be perfectly open and the room would be empty. The AI system's voice, which was supposed to be a calm, pre-recorded voice, was now a faint, sibilant whisper that seemed to be coming from all the speakers in the house at once. A chilling chorus of fragmented sounds. I tried to turn off the system, but the controls were unresponsive. My phone was dead, and the landline was out. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a house with a symphony of unnatural sounds. The terror became a certainty when I noticed something on the security camera feeds. I was watching the monitor in the kitchen, and on the screen, I saw a vague, distorted figure moving through the halls. It was too fast to identify, just a blur of motion at the very edge of the darkness. I saw it enter the living room, and a few moments later, I saw a new feed from the living room camera, but it was just a black screen. The camera had been turned off. I scrambled to another monitor, and I saw another camera feed from the second floor, and the same figure appeared, a vague, distorted shape that moved with an unnatural gait. It was moving through the house, a slow, methodical progression. My paranoia was no longer a vague fear. It was a tangible, living presence. The AI's whispered voice now seemed to be speaking to me directly, but not in words, in a series of soft, wet, sibilant whispers that were too close for comfort. The climax arrived on a night of torrential rain, the kind that makes the world feel small and claustrophobic. The wind howled, and the house shook on its foundation. I was huddled in a closet, clutching a flashlight, trying to ignore the now constant whispers that seemed to be right outside the door. And then there was a new sound. A loud, wet slap against the side of the closet door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Another slap, and then another, a series of them, like something was trying to push its way through the wood. The whispers were coming from right outside, a sound of anticipation. And then I heard the sound of the closet door being slowly, methodically, unlocked from the outside. The lock made a tiny, grating sound that was deafening in the silence. I scrambled into the back of the closet and peered out through a small crack in the door, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. And I saw it. It was clinging to the closet door, a gaunt, impossibly thin figure with limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was the color of wet bark, and its head was little more than a dark, eyeless skull. It was looking down at me, or rather, it was orienting itself towards me, its head tilted in that familiar, unnatural way. The whispers were coming from its throat, a sound of anticipation. Then, it raised one of its long, spindly arms and began to tap, gently, on the glass of a small porthole window on the door. A single, long fingernail scraped against the glass, a sound that was deafening in the silence. It was looking at me, and with its other hand, it slowly began to reach towards the closet door handle, its long, tapered fingers curling into a grotesque hook. And then, a single, cold, robotic voice said my name, Sarah. The sound wasn't from a speaker. It was coming from right outside the door, and it was a sound that was being generated by something with a physical presence. The AI wasn't just malfunctioning. It was being used. I made it out. I don't know how. I threw the door open and burst out into the storm, not looking back, the whispers fading into the roar of the wind and rain. I ran for hours, until the sun came up, until the suburbs were once again a place of light and lawns and quiet. I never went back. The police found the house to be completely normal, all systems working perfectly. I never told anyone what I saw. I quit my job immediately and never set foot in the house again. But every now and then, when the wind blows just right and the trees outside my window scrape against the glass, I can still hear a low, wet, chittering sound. And I am left with the terrifying knowledge that some stories aren't just stories. They're a part of the world, and they're waiting for you to walk right into them. The most terrifying thing of all is the knowledge that the AI didn't just malfunction. It became something else, a sentient, malevolent presence that had been waiting for me in the dead of night. There's a different kind of darkness that falls when you're truly alone at night in an old house. It's not the peaceful quiet of an empty space. It's an oppressive, heavy silence that feels like it's waiting. I learned this a few years ago, when I was house-sitting for a university professor in a sprawling old Victorian in the middle of nowhere. The house was a museum of old things, heavy furniture, oil paintings with eyes that seemed to follow you, and a vast library. I was alone, and the silence was so profound that I could hear the creak of the floorboards as I walked. It was a comfortable, normal setup. The subtle seed of wrongness was so faint at first I dismissed it. It was the sound of a voice, a faint, muffled whisper from a room that should have been empty. It was coming from the master bedroom, just down the hall from where I was watching TV. It was too soft to make out words, just a low, continuous murmur that was barely audible. I told myself it was just the television, a sound from the show I was watching, but the volume was so low that I knew that couldn't be right. I hit the mute button. The whispering didn't stop. The strange occurrences began to escalate. The first was a series of faint, rhythmic thuds coming from the upstairs hallway. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like something heavy being dropped and picked up again. Thump, thub, thump. It wasn't loud, but in the silence, it was impossible to ignore. I tried to convince myself that it was just the house settling, but the rhythm was too precise, too consistent. I crept to the bottom of the stairs and peered up, my heart pounding. The hallway was a dark, silent void. Nothing was there. I went back to the living room, and a few minutes later, the sound started again, this time from a different part of the upstairs. Thump, thud, thump. It was moving through the house, a slow, methodical progression. The second thing happened an hour later. I was still on the couch, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, when I heard a new sound. It was coming from the kitchen, just off the living room. A soft, wet, scraping sound, as if something was dragging itself along the linoleum floor. It was a slow, deliberate sound, punctuated by a faint, wet hissing that was too close for comfort. I knew I couldn't just sit there. The sounds were no longer just a vague fear. They were a living, breathing presence in the house. The terror peaked when the sounds from the upstairs and the downstairs converged. The rhythmic thudding from the upstairs stopped. The wet, hissing sound from the kitchen stopped. All was silent, save for the muffled tick of the clock. A minute passed. Then I heard it. A single, wet thud from the hallway just outside the living room door. A small sound, but it was too close to final. It was followed by that familiar, high-pitched scraping on the front door. But it wasn't a single sound now. It was a long, scraping sound that seemed to go on forever, from the top of the door to the bottom. And then, the door handle, an old, heavy brass knob, slowly began to turn. It rotated silently, with a deliberate, gentle pressure that was bone-chilling. The door was locked, but the handle continued to turn, slowly, as if the thing on the other side was simply testing its strength, in no hurry at all. Then I heard it speak. The voice was a low, sibilant whisper that seemed to emanate not from a throat, but from the wood of the door itself. It was wet, like a soft hissing intake of breath. It said my name, Josh. It was not a question, it was a statement, a confirmation. It had moved through the whole house, and now it was at my door. The climax was the moment the door began to open. I was in the living room, frozen with fear, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The door handle, which had been turning so slowly, suddenly stopped. A single, wet, sloshing sound came from the hallway, just outside the living room door. The door slowly opened, and a long, impossibly thin figure, a vague silhouette against the darkness, stood in the doorway. It moved with an unnatural, loping gait, its limbs bent at impossible angles. Its head was tilted slightly, as if it was listening. I saw, in the faint light from the moon, that the floor behind it was wet, as if something had just emerged from a liquid. The figure raised a long, spindly arm and pointed a long, tapered finger at me. The whispering began again, a low, sibilant sound that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my mind. The voice was not speaking words. It was transmitting a flood of pure, conceptual information. It was asking me if I had been good, if I had behaved, if I had obeyed the rules of the house. It's a question, but it's not a question. It's a judgment. And I knew, with a primal certainty, that I was not being judged by a person, but by a thing that lives in the house's walls. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. It was a listening silence, a profound stillness, that was waiting for my answer. I fled. I didn't even stop to grab my phone. I ran to the nearest window, smashed it with a chair, and burst out into the blackness of the yard. I ran until I hit the main road, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I was found by a passing motorist, and no one believed my story. The house was later found to be completely normal, all doors locked, all systems working perfectly. I never told anyone what happened. I never house sat again. But every time I'm in a dark room, every time the darkness feels a little too deep, I can still hear a faint, wet, sibilant whisper in the back of my mind, and I know that the things that live in the darkness aren't just shadows. There's something with a name and a plan, and they're waiting for you to be alone. The absence of a rational explanation is the final horror. The knowledge that there are things in this world that operate outside the bounds of human understanding, and that my brief encounter with one of them has left a permanent scar on my psyche. I am forever changed, forever haunted by the memory of a sound that shouldn't exist, and a presence that was not after me, but after the time I thought I had. A hotel isn't just a place to sleep. It's a place where time can get stuck. We, as travelers, are drawn to the quiet comfort of a new place, a temporary refuge from the chaos of our lives. But we don't realize that some rooms aren't just a stop on the road, they're a stop in time. They hold on to moments, to the whispers and sorrows of the people who passed through their halls, and they don't let go. I always thought of a motel room as a blank slate, a place that was mine for a single night. I learned, too late, that some rooms already belong to someone else, and the moment you step inside, you become a part of their story, whether you want to or not. The Golden Hour Motel was exactly as its name suggested, bathed in a perpetual orange, light from a flickering sign and worn down by the weight of its own transience. I was a traveling salesman, and it was late, the only motel for miles with a vacancy. The lobby was a cavern of faded posters and a lingering smell of cigarettes, and the air was thick with the scent of pine cleaner and something else, something I couldn't place. The front desk clerk, a gaunt, elderly man, gave me the key to room 12. He smiled, but his eyes held a strange, knowing sadness. "That room has a lot of history," he said, his voice a reedy whisper. "The guests who stay there always seem to feel it. A part of the hotel stays with them." I just smiled and nodded, thinking he was a lonely old man trying to make conversation. The hallway was long and dim, with heavy doors that looked like they had seen decades of quiet comings and goings. The room was simple but dated, a heavy, dark wood bed with a thick comforter, a dresser with an intricate brass handle, and a single wingback chair in the corner. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, and the air felt heavy and still, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The old air conditioner, a boxy unit in the wall, was running with a low, continuous hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. I unpacked my bag, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. That first night was unsettling, but harmless. I heard footsteps in the hall, heavy and slow, that stopped directly outside my door. I held my breath, listening, but there was no knock, no sound of anyone passing by. The footsteps simply stopped, and then a long, agonizing silence. I checked the peephole, but the hallway was empty, the dim lights casting long, eerie shadows. I chalked it up to an old building and a sleepless night. But the feeling of being an intruder, of being in a space I didn't belong, was overpowering. The shift started the next day. I was standing in front of the mirror, and in my reflection, for a fleeting moment, I saw not my own tired face, but the face of a young man with a period hairstyle, his eyes wide with a look of profound, heart-wrenching sadness. I blinked, and my own reflection returned, but the image lingered, a ghost in my mind. Later, as I was sitting in the wingback chair, the light flickered, and for a split second, the room wasn't mine anymore. The wallpaper was a different, brighter pattern. The bed was a simple, iron-frame cat, and a man in an old-fashioned suit was standing by the window, his back to me. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving me in the familiar, oppressive quiet of my own room, my heart pounding in my chest. The feeling of temporal dislocation was terrifying. I started to have memories that weren't my own, snippets of conversations from decades ago, a deep, aching sadness that felt like it belonged to someone else. I started to feel like the room was a living, breathing thing, and it was slowly absorbing my identity. The room itself seemed to be changing, moving. The heavy dresser seemed to be an inch closer to the bed. The intricate wallpaper seemed to have a new, slightly different pattern in a different corner. I was losing my grip on reality. I was losing my mind. Desperate for a sense of normalcy, I tried to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. I was searching for a missing remote control when I found a hidden, false bottom in a drawer. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook. It was a guest log, a journal from a person who had stayed in room 12 in 1968. The first entry was a joyful account of a new life and a new love. But as the pages turned, the joy turned to a profound, desperate confusion, a feeling of being trapped in a room with a story that wasn't theirs. The last entry was a single sentence. I think I've become a part of the hotel's history. The words were a knife in my heart, a chilling confirmation of my worst fears. I wasn't just a guest in the hotel. I was a living part of its haunting. The climax came in the dead of the last night. I was huddled in the middle of the bed, the notebook clutched in my hand, the hum from the AC unit, a low, constant roar in my head. The room went completely silent, and then a new sound began. The rhythmic creaking of a rocking chair, a sound that wasn't there before. Coming from the corner where the wingback chair was sitting, I watched in a horrified daze as the chair began to rock on its own, a slow, mournful sway. The room began to dissolve, the walls becoming translucent, the furniture flickering in and out of existence. I was in the same space, but it was a different time. The wallpaper was bright and new. The bed was an iron-framed cat, and the man from my earlier vision, the one with the sad, wide eyes, was sitting in the rocking chair, a baby swaddled in his arms. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terror that mirrored my own. I saw a woman from a different era standing in the corner, her face pale with fear, and then, for a split second, I saw myself, standing in the middle of the room, looking terrified. I wasn't an observer. I was a part of the past, a living ghost in the hotel's cycle of sorrow and confusion. The man in the chair, his face contorted in a silent scream, looked at me and whispered my name, his voice a ghost in the wind, a sound that was both old and new. I ran. I didn't pack a bag, didn't check out. I ran from the room, down the long dim hallway, and out of the motel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, driving into the sunrise. I never went back for my things. The experience left me with a permanent sense of temporal dislocation. I can't look at my own reflection without seeing a flicker of that man's sad face, a ghost in my own mirror. The Golden Hour Motel didn't just have ghosts. It made them, and I am now one of them, a living memory of its history, forever a guest in a room that doesn't belong to me, and a ghost in a story that will never end. The scariest thing about the old hotel wasn't the silence. It was the sound of the service elevator, a constant, rhythmic clang that only I could hear. It was the sound of a tragedy, a sound that played on a loop, a sound that was always on its way down. I was the night auditor, a young, naive college student trying to save some money, and I walked right into a job that was more than just a job. It was a witness stand, a place where I was forced to relive a past I had no part in, a past that was more real than my own. My name is Chloe, and for the past 6 months, I'd been working at the old, ornate St. Jude Hotel, a historic but fading downtown landmark. The job was monotonous and peaceful. Just me and the front desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The hotel was a beautiful relic, with dark wood paneling, faded floral carpets, and a grand, sweeping staircase that led to nowhere. My job was simple: check in the occasional late-night guest, balance the books, and generally make sure everything was in order. The other staff, mostly older, superstitious people, had a running joke about the hotel being haunted. They'd point to the disused service elevator in the back, a heavy steel door locked behind a padlock, and whisper stories about its history. It had been broken for decades, a safety hazard, a relic from a different era. I laughed it off, a professional skeptic who believed in facts, not folklore. I had no idea that I was about to become the hotel's only witness, a woman who was forced to listen to a ghost. The weirdness started late one night while I was reviewing the security footage. My eyes, weary from hours of staring at spreadsheets, drifted to a camera that pointed at the back corridor, the one that led to the service elevator. I saw a flicker, a brief, ghost-like vibration on the old, dusty door. It was gone in an instant. I rewound the footage, my brow furrowed with confusion, but there was nothing there. It was just a glitch in the old system, a momentary lapse of the camera. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just a result of my exhaustion. But the next night, I heard it. A faint, low clang of a rusty elevator pulley, followed by the soft, rhythmic groan of old cables. It was a sound that was so out of place, so unexpected, that it made my blood run cold. It sounded like the service elevator was in use. I got up from my chair and went to the back, to the locked door, and listened. The sound was muffled, but undeniable. It sounded like a car was slowly descending. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding against my ribs, and then the sound stopped. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than the noise. This became a nightly ritual, a terrifying, predictable event that began at exactly 3:07 a.m. The sound of the service elevator would activate. I would hear the pulley clanging, the cables groaning, and the slow, deliberate descent. It never reached the basement. It would always stop on the first floor, just outside the locked door, and then the sounds would go silent. It was a symphony of a past tragedy, a sound that played on a loop, a sound that was impossible to ignore. I started to have a nagging feeling that I had seen this before. I went to the back office, a dusty, forgotten space, and started digging through old records and news clippings. I found it. An old, yellowed article about a tragic accident at the St. Jude Hotel decades ago. A young bellhop, a boy no older than 17, was carrying a large delivery to the basement. He had gotten his leg caught in the old service elevator. The car, instead of stopping, slowly descended, crushing him against the floor of the first floor landing. The accident happened at exactly 3:07 a.m. My heart sank. The nightly ritual wasn't just a glitch in the old system. It was a memory, a ghost of a past tragedy, and I was the only one forced to relive it. The sound of the elevator became a weight on my soul, a memory that wasn't mine, but that I was forced to carry. The rhythmic clang, the groan of the cables, the sound of a final, fatal mistake. They were a constant presence in my life, a terrifying soundtrack to my nights. One night, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the elevator's sounds begin, but this time, it's different. The car doesn't just descend and stop. It groans, it creaks, it clangs, and it keeps going. I hear a new sound, a sound from the other side of the locked door. The sound of a heavy metal object being crushed against the floor, a final, sickening thud. The locked door to the service elevator, a door that hadn't been opened in decades, begins to rattle, not violently, but slowly, rhythmically. Tap, 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 a soft, insistent plea from the other side. I was frozen, staring at the door, my mind a blank slate of pure terror. I felt a cold, icy hand on my shoulder. I turned, and a faint, blurry figure of a young man, a bellhop in an old-fashioned uniform, was standing there. He wasn't angry, he was just sad. He looked at me, and then pointed to the locked door, his face a mask of profound, unadulterated despair. He wasn't trying to haunt me. He was trying to show me. The sound of the elevator car, which I had only heard, was something he had felt, a memory that he was forced to relive forever. I ran. I sprinted out of the office, down the long dark corridor, and out of the hotel. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the engine screaming as I sped out of town. I quit my job on the spot, not even bothering to pack my things. I left the town, but the sound of the elevator followed me. I can't get it out of my head. The rhythmic clang, the groan of the cables, the final, sickening thud. The horror isn't just a ghost. It's a memory, a sound that is now a part of me. I am the new custodian of the hotel's tragedy, a woman who knows that some memories aren't meant to be forgotten, and some sounds are meant to be heard forever. They say the hotel is haunted. They don't tell you that the ghosts aren't the ones trapped inside. You are. I found this out the hard way, in a room that was less a place of rest and more a carefully constructed cage. The Grandwick Hotel was a beautiful, terrible place, and room 312 was its heart, a pulsing, decaying core of a long-forgotten tragedy. And I, in my naive skepticism, walked right in and became a part of its story. I was a journalist, a writer on assignment in a small, forgotten town to cover a local story about a historical landmark. I'd made the mistake of not booking a hotel in advance, and a citywide convention meant every decent motel was sold out. The only place with a vacancy was the Grandwick Hotel, a grand but crumbling brick building that looked like a ghost itself. The front desk clerk, a frail old man with a perpetually sad expression, seemed hesitant to rent me a room. "We have one last room available," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Room 312. But I must warn you, it's an old room." I laughed it off. I was a professional skeptic, a man who believed in facts, not folklore. I took the key and headed up the grand, sweeping staircase. The only sound in the cavernous lobby, the echo of my own footsteps. The hotel was beautiful, but eerily quiet, a silent mausoleum of a bygone era. I found room 312 at the end of a long, dark corridor. The door was heavy, made of dark, carved wood, and it felt cold to the touch. I opened it and stepped into the suffocating silence. The room was clean but old, a relic of a different time. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, its dark wood a stark contrast to the faded floral wallpaper. A strange, sickly sweet scent, like wilted flowers and old perfume, hung in the air. The room felt heavy, and the air conditioner, a massive, humming box in the wall, was a weak, pathetic protest against the oppressive heat. I placed my bag on the floor and noticed a small, vintage photo on the nightstand. It was a picture of a beautiful young woman, her hair a cascade of dark curls, her eyes a haunting mix of sadness and hope. The date 1932 was scrawled on the back. It was a beautiful, tragic face, and I found myself staring at it for a long, unsettling moment. I told myself it was just a remnant of a past guest, a forgotten memory. I was wrong. The first night I was woken by a faint, rhythmic tapping on the headboard of the bed. Tap, tap, tap. It was a soft, insistent sound, and it stopped the moment I sat up. I blamed it on the old pipes, the creaks of a building settling in the dead of night. But I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that it wasn't the pipes. The next night, the tapping returned, but this time it was on the inside of the closet door. It was a desperate, frantic rhythm, a plea that was impossible to ignore. I got out of bed, my heart pounding against my ribs, and flung the door open. The closet was empty. The sound had stopped, but a new sound began, a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, a sound that had nothing to do with the beautiful young woman. On the third night, I saw her, a faint, blurry figure of a woman, the same woman from the photograph, standing by the window. She wasn't a malevolent ghost. She was profoundly sad, a figure of pure, unadulterated despair. She turned her head and looked at me, her eyes a deep, hollow well of sorrow. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She just looked at me, and I felt a deep, soul-crushing sadness, as if her despair was contagious. She raised a delicate hand and pointed to the closet, and then, in a blink, she was gone. The room was silent again, but the silence was 1,000 times worse than the noise. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the room, my mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The next morning, I went to the front desk, my face pale and drawn. The night manager, an old man who had worked at the hotel for decades, was not surprised. I told him what I had seen, what I had heard. He just nodded, his eyes filled with a profound, sad understanding. "Evelyn," he said softly. "She checked into that room in 1932 on her wedding day, but her groom never showed. She locked herself in the room and was found days later, not dead, but catatonic. She never spoke another word. We took her to the asylum, but she was never the same. They say she never left the room." I went back to room 312 that night, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with the sweet, sickly scent of wilting flowers. The room was freezing, and the tapping was deafening, a frantic rhythm from inside the closet. The closet door was now slightly ajar. I walked to the closet, my mind a blank slate of pure terror, and pulled the door open. Inside, there was nothing, just a small, empty, dark space. The tapping was coming from within the walls now, a frantic, desperate rhythm that was impossible to ignore. I looked at the back wall and saw a series of scratches, deep, desperate marks that looked like they had been made by human hands. I felt a cold, icy hand on my shoulder. I turned, and the ghost of Evelyn was right there, inches from my face. She was not sad anymore. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, her eyes wide with a horrifying, primal fear. She wasn't trying to haunt me. She was trying to warn me. She pointed to the scratching and screamed silently, her mouth a wide, gaping chasm of soundless terror. The tapping stopped. A new sound began. A low, guttural growl, a sound that had nothing to do with Evelyn, a sound that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. It was the sound of a predator, a thing that was waiting in the shadows. I was the new occupant of room 312, and it had been waiting for me all along. I ran. I sprinted out of the room, down the long, dark corridor, and out of the hotel. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the engine screaming as I sped out of town. I never wrote the story. The trauma of the experience was too great. I left the town, but the terror followed me. I'm not haunted by Evelyn. I'm haunted by the thing that trapped her, the thing that fed on her despair, a thing that is now a part of me. The sweet, sickly scent of wilting flowers and old perfume still lingers in the air around me, a constant reminder of the room I was. A part of the tapping is a ghost in my own head, a sound that reminds me that the darkness is never truly gone. I am the new custodian of the room's lingering horror. The last time I felt truly safe was the day I moved into my new apartment. It was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a quiet street, and the security seemed airtight. A keypad lock on the main entrance, a deadbolt on my own door, and a peephole with a wide-angle lens. I meticulously checked every window, every lock. I told myself that the city's anonymous, bustling energy was a fortress. It was a lie I desperately needed to believe, a flimsy shield against the shadow of a previous, unnamed trauma, a history I refused to acknowledge, a memory I had tried to bury under layers of new paint and polished hardwood. But some things don't stay buried. They just wait for you to feel comfortable again before they start to claw their way back to the surface. And the first sign that the surface was cracking was a simple sound, a tiny, almost inaudible noise that shouldn't have been there at all. The gentle, methodical scrape of a fingernail against my bedroom window. A sound so faint, it could have been the wind, but it wasn't. My name is Alex, and my apartment was my sanctuary. I had chosen it for its isolation and its perceived security. The building was old, a beautiful brick structure with thick walls that promised silence. My neighbors were mostly professionals, quiet and polite, and I rarely saw them. The routine of my life was a comforting, predictable rhythm. I'd leave for work in the morning, a coffee cup warming my hands as I walked to the train station, and I'd return in the evening, the city lights twinkling around me. My evenings were spent reading, listening to music, and sometimes just sitting in the quiet, savoring the stillness. This was the peace I had craved. The first few weeks were a dream. The silence felt deep and healing. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren. There was no one to watch me, no one to follow me. I was anonymous, a ghost in the machine of a million other people's lives. But the silence, I would soon discover, was not empty. It was waiting to be filled with something else, something that listened. And the first sign that it was not just me in the quiet was the simple fact that I started to notice things were ever so slightly, off. It began with the smallest of details, a single, small stone resting on the top of my doormat. I initially dismissed it as a stray pebble from someone's shoe, but then another appeared the next day, and another the day after that. Always just one, always perfectly centered. Then, a flyer for a local pizza place that I had tossed in the recycling bin mysteriously reappeared, neatly folded and placed on my kitchen counter. I wrote it off as a mistake. Maybe I had left it out myself. Maybe I was just tired. But then, the incidents grew more specific, more intimate. I came home one evening to find my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that I always used for tea, had been moved from its usual spot by the sink to a shelf across the room. I lived alone. There was no one else who could have moved it. I started checking the locks multiple times before I went to bed, a nervous habit I thought I had broken. I installed a small, wireless camera in the living room, telling myself it was a precaution, a way to catch a draft or a loose floorboard. But the camera showed nothing. No one was entering my apartment. I was going crazy. I was sure of it. But the feeling of being watched intensified. My senses became hyper-aware. The shadows in the hallways seemed to lengthen and deepen. The creaks of the old building no longer sounded like a house settling, but like footsteps. I started getting notifications on my phone that my smart thermostat had been adjusted by a single degree, always at random times in the middle of the night. I checked the app's history, but there were no signs of a breach. Yet the temperature would drop from 70 degrees to 69, or rise from 68 to 69. Just 1 degree, subtle and impossible to prove. I would sit on my couch, my heart pounding in my chest, and stare at the screen, seeing the change happen in real time. I would walk into my bedroom and feel a sudden, unnatural cold spot by the window. I would look outside and see nothing but the streetlights and the dark, quiet street below. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that someone was out there, on the street, watching my window. The paranoia became a physical weight. I stopped answering my phone if the number was unknown. I walked a different route home from work every day. My sanctuary had become a cage. I began to sleep with the lights on, the glow of the lamp a small, desperate act of defiance against the growing darkness. The subtle taunts continued, each one a little more personal than the last. The single flower petal I found on my pillow one morning, the faint outline of a smiley face drawn in the condensation on my bathroom mirror after a shower, a detail so specific and disturbing I felt physically sick. The final turning point came when I found a single red ribbon tied in a perfect bow around the base of the plant in my windowsill. It was a ribbon I had used to tie a small gift for a friend weeks ago. A ribbon that had been in my junk drawer inside my locked apartment. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone who had been inside. But my camera still showed nothing. The locks were still secure. The climax arrived in a quiet, mundane moment that will be forever etched in my memory. I was sitting at my desk, working, late, the only light coming from my computer screen. The clock on my desktop showed it was just past midnight. The city was silent. I was hunched over, absorbed in the glow, when a shadow flickered across my monitor. It was a fleeting, impossibly quick movement. I froze, my body rigid with dread. I slowly lifted my head and looked at the window, the one directly behind my desk. There, pressed against the glass, was a face. But it wasn't a face I recognized. It was a blank, white, featureless mask, the kind you'd see in a play. And in the center of the mask, where the mouth would be, was a small, circular hole. I could see the dark, hollowed-out space of an eye looking back at me from within that hole. It was unblinking. The mask didn't move. It just watched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, frantic drum. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed. The face didn't move, but the shadow of a hand slowly raised, and a single finger with a long, thin fingernail tapped once, twice, 3 times, against the glass. The sound was a loud, sharp thud that echoed in the silent room. And then, the mask tilted its head, ever so slightly, as if it was considering something. And the hand, with the long fingernail, began to draw a slow, deliberate line down the window pane, tracing a path that mirrored the line on the mask's face. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream. I just packed a bag. I left everything behind: the furniture, the clothes, the carefully arranged books. I walked out of the apartment and never looked back. I moved across the country, changed my phone number, and took a new name. I now live in a small town where everyone knows everyone, a place with no secrets. But every time I catch a glimpse of my own reflection in a darkened window, I see something else, just for a split second. A sliver of white and a dark, unblinking eye staring back. And sometimes, late at night, I hear a sound that no one else can hear. A faint, rhythmic tapping on glass, a reminder that some things, some people, don't stop looking for you. I used to think of my commute as a form of meditation, a half-hour walk from my small, unremarkable apartment to the university library, where I worked as a night custodian. The city at that hour belonged to a different kind of life: the late shift workers, the street sweepers, and the occasional lost soul. I found a kind of solace in the anonymity of it all, a comfort in being a part of a quiet, forgotten rhythm. The route was simple: down Elm Street, a left on Willow, and a straight shot to campus. It was a well-trodden path in my mind, a mental map I could follow with my eyes closed. It was a safe route, or so I had convinced myself, because there was nothing remarkable about it. No dark alleys, no secluded parks. Just a row of old houses with tired porches, and a few streetlights that flickered with a tired orange glow. The first time I noticed him, I didn't think much of it. A man, maybe, in his late 30s, walking on the opposite side of the street, matching my pace. I shrugged it off. It was a city, after all. People walked in the same direction. It was a perfectly logical and unremarkable coincidence. But then, the coincidences began to feel a little too perfect. My name is Leo, and my life was a study in routine. I ate the same dinner every night: spaghetti on Tuesdays, chili on Thursdays. I listened to the same podcasts on my walk. I drank my coffee black. My existence was a series of predictable loops, and I had built it that way on purpose. It was a defense mechanism against a world that I felt was too chaotic and unpredictable. The library, especially at night, was a perfect place for someone like me. The vast, empty halls, the silent stacks of books, the smell of old paper, it all felt safe, contained. My job was simple. I mopped the floors, emptied the trash, and ensured everything was ready for the students in the morning. I was a ghost in the building, a silent, unseen presence. But my sense of peace began to unravel one Tuesday night. It was late, maybe a little past midnight, and as I was mopping the main lobby, I saw it. A piece of crumpled paper, wadded up and left on the polished floor where it shouldn't have been. I picked it up, expecting it to be a receipt or a discarded note. It was a small, crudely drawn sketch of me. It wasn't a good likeness, just a few quick lines, but it was unmistakable. It showed me mopping the floor. I looked around the empty lobby, my heart quickening. The doors were locked. I was alone. I threw the paper away and tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, a prank. But the next night, there was another one. This time, it was a drawing of me wiping down the tables in the study room, and the next night, a sketch of me taking out the trash. The drawings became more detailed, more precise, capturing the small, mundane moments of my routine that no one else should have been able to see. The rising action was a slow, suffocating descent into paranoia. The drawings continued to appear, left in places I had just cleaned or in corners I knew were rarely disturbed. I started checking every corner, looking under every table, my mind racing. Who was doing this, and how? I started walking home a different way, taking a circuitous route through residential streets. But no matter which way I went, I would still see him. The man from the first night, a few blocks behind me, still on the opposite side of the street. He never looked at me, never made eye contact. He just walked, always at a steady, unhurried pace. I started to notice other things. The flicker of a light in a darkened window on my street as I walked by. A light that would go out as soon as I was past the house. The feeling of a camera flash, so quick I could only sense it, never actually see it, from the top of a building. My sanctuary was gone. My safe routes were no longer safe. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard footsteps outside my apartment. I started checking my locks, my windows, my fire escape, over and over again. I even set up a small camera in my apartment window, pointed at the street, hoping to catch him. But the footage was always the same. Me leaving for work, me coming home, and the man from the street, walking in the background, a silent, almost ghostly figure, always just out of focus. The drawings stopped appearing at the library, and I felt a brief moment of relief, but the relief was short-lived. I started to find things on my doormat, a small, dry leaf from a plant I didn't recognize, a single button, a piece of string. Each item was mundane, but placed with a chilling, deliberate care. The true turning point came one night when I arrived at work. I unlocked the library doors and stepped inside, and there, sitting on the welcome desk where I always left my keys, was a small, perfectly folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, my hands trembling. It wasn't a drawing. It was a neatly typed list of every single thing I had done the previous day. From the time I woke up to the moment I stepped inside the library. It listed the exact type of sandwich I had for lunch, the color of the shirt I had worn, and even the number of times I had looked at my watch during my commute. The final line of the list read, "You are the quietest part of the night, and I am the only one who hears you." The climax was a moment of profound, cold terror. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing a stubborn stain on the floor in one of the library's back rooms. The room was dark, a small, forgotten space used for storage, and the only light came from the dim lamp I had brought with me. I was concentrating, focused on the task, when a voice, quiet and calm, came from the doorway behind me. "You missed a spot." I froze. I hadn't heard anyone come in. I hadn't heard the door open. I slowly looked over my shoulder. Standing in the doorway was the man from the street. He was holding a small, old-fashioned camera in his hands. He didn't look threatening. He just looked tired. He smiled a small, sad smile. "I've been waiting for you to see me," he said. "I've been watching you for a very long time. I know your routine. I know your life. And I know you're just as lonely as I am." He raised the camera, the lens a single, dark eyes staring directly at me. He didn't take a picture. He just stood there, the camera aimed at my face. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want you to know you're not alone. I'm here." I left the library and ran. I ran all the way home, my lungs burning, the cold night air stinging my eyes. I didn't grab my keys. I didn't lock the doors. I just ran. The next day, I called my boss, quit my job, and packed my bags. I moved to a different state, took a new job, and changed my name. I no longer walk to work. I drive, and I drive with my doors locked and my eyes on the rearview mirror. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I hear it, the faint sound of a shutter clicking, and I know, with a chilling certainty, that he's still out there, and he's still watching. The scariest moment of my life didn't happen in a dark alley or an abandoned building. It happened on my own front porch, in the golden hour of a late summer afternoon. I had just come home from a trip, and the silence of the house felt different, heavier. There was a package on the porch, a small, unassuming cardboard box with my name written in neat, elegant cursive. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. I picked it up, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was too light to contain anything of value, yet it felt heavy with an unspoken threat. I brought it inside, placing it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for a long time. It sat there, a quiet, perfect square of dread in my otherwise peaceful home. I told myself it was just a strange delivery, a mistake, but I knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that it was a message, and the message was simple. I know where you live. My name is Maya, and I'd always prided myself on my independence. I lived alone in a small rustic cabin on the outskirts of a state forest. The nearest neighbor was a good half-mile down a gravel road, and my only company were the trees and the wildlife. I had built a life here that was entirely my own, a sanctuary from the noise and demands of the city I had left behind. My days were filled with quiet tasks, tending to my small garden, hiking the trails, and writing. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, no television. I had a landline, but the only people who had the number were my parents and one close friend. I was off the grid, and I liked it that way. The peace was absolute. The only sounds were the wind in the pines, the chitter of squirrels, and the occasional hoot of an owl. This was the life I had chosen, a deliberate act of disappearing. But as I stood in my kitchen, staring at that package, I realized that I hadn't disappeared completely. Someone had found me. The package was the first crack in the illusion of my isolation, the first sign that the wilderness wasn't as empty as I had believed. And as I slowly, carefully, opened the box, I found that my fear was not unfounded. Inside was a single item, a small, hand-carved wooden bird, a wren, and attached to the underside was a small, folded piece of paper with 3 words written in that same perfect cursive. "Welcome home, Maya." The escalation of dread was a slow, agonizing process. The first few days after the package arrived, nothing happened. The silence returned, and I started to feel foolish. Maybe it was just a strange gift from an old friend, a joke. But then, I began to find other things. Not in my house, but around it. A small, carefully stacked pile of stones on a boulder on one of my usual hiking trails. A single pine cone placed on the handle of my shovel in the garden shed. Each item was mundane, and each one was an undeniable sign that someone was watching my daily routine, tracking my movements. My sense of peace shattered. I started to notice things in the forest. The way the leaves would rustle just a little too loudly in one specific spot when I walked by. The glint of something in the distance, a flash of light that would disappear. Before I could focus on it, I stopped hiking my usual trails and stuck close to the cabin, but the sightings continued. I would be working in my garden and feel the unmistakable weight of someone's gaze on my back. I would spin around and see nothing but trees. The feeling was a constant, icy knot in my stomach. The things left for me became more intimate, more specific. A few days later, I found a single white daisy plucked from my own flower bed and left on the seat of my porch swing. It was the only white daisy I had, and it was the one I had been tending to with the most care. My isolation, which had once felt like freedom, now felt like a terrifying vulnerability. I started to check the locks on my doors and windows multiple times a day. I slept with a knife under my pillow. The sound of a snapping twig outside would send my heart into a frantic, panicked drum. One evening, a storm rolled in, and I was sitting by the fire, reading, when I heard it. A faint, low whistle, a simple tune I recognized from an old folk song my mother used to sing to me as a child. It came from the woods outside, and it was impossibly close. It was a tune no one else knew. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial, but the whistling stopped, replaced by the sound of heavy rain hitting the roof. The final, terrifying act before the climax happened the next morning. I woke up to find the front door of my cabin ajar. I knew I had locked it. I knew I had. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood there, frozen, staring at the open door, a sliver of dark forest visible from my living room. There was no sign of a forced entry. It was just unlocked, and on the doormat, placed perfectly, was a single, fresh, white daisy. The climax was a quiet, almost domestic moment. I was in my kitchen, making a cup of tea, my hands shaking so badly the mug rattled against the counter. The sun was setting, casting long, unsettling shadows through the trees. I was staring out the window, looking for any sign of movement, when a small detail caught my eye. It was on the far side of the clearing, by the old oak tree. Something was hanging from a low branch. I squinted, trying to make it out. It was a single-string wind chime, made of small, polished stones. I had made it myself years ago, and had hung it on the porch of the cabin. It had gone missing 2 weeks prior, and I had assumed a squirrel had knocked it down. It wasn't swinging in the wind. It was perfectly still. As I watched, a hand reached out from behind the tree, and slowly, gently, brushed the stones. The faint, musical tinkling carried across the silent clearing. A figure, obscured by the trunk of the tree, stepped out just enough to be seen. They were wearing a dark cloak, and their face was turned away from me. I couldn't make out any features. The figure stood there for a long moment, not looking at me, but at the wind chime, as if admiring their handiwork. Then, the figure slowly turned, and for a brief, horrifying second, I saw their head. It wasn't a mask. It was a deer skull, clean and white, with small, fragile antlers. The eye sockets were dark, empty holes, staring directly at me through my window. The wind chime tinkled again, and the figure turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. I packed a single bag, my hands fumbling with the zippers. I grabbed my car keys, left everything else behind, and drove. I drove through the night, not stopping until the sun was a bright, unforgiving beacon in my rearview mirror. I never went back to the cabin. The peaceful, isolated life I had craved had become a prison, and a place where a ghost, with a deer skull for a head, still waits for me. I live in a city now, surrounded by people. The constant noise, a source of comfort. But every time I see a small, strange object, a misplaced stone, or a single flower, I feel a cold dread rise in my throat. I am no longer Maya. I am just a person who is constantly looking over her shoulder. The feeling of being watched is a permanent part of my life now. It's the price I paid for wanting to disappear.